The morning sun barely crept over the horizon when Clara Whitmore's hands were already deep in sudsy water, scrubbing clothes against the washboard outside her family's modest cabin. The wood plank structure sat at the edge of Meadowbrook, a small frontier town in Wyoming Territory where everyone knew everyone else's business and their financial struggles. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara's father, Thomas Whitmore, had been a dreamer. He'd moved the family west with promises of fertile land and prosperous farming, but 3 years of drought had turned those dreams to dust. When he died last winter from pneumonia, he left behind nothing but debts, a worn-out plow, and 2 daughters who suddenly found themselves at the mercy of a town that measured worth in cattle, land, and dowry money. "Clara, Mrs. Henderson is here for her laundry," her younger sister Lily called from the doorway. At 15, Lily still had the innocent belief that hard work and kindness would eventually win people over. Clara, at 23, knew better. She wiped her hands on her apron and carried the basket of freshly cleaned linens to the front of the cabin. Mrs. Henderson stood there, her silk dress and feathered hat a stark contrast to Clara's patched cotton work dress. "About time," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, inspecting the clothes with a critical eye. "I suppose these will do. Though I noticed a small stain still on the collar of my husband's shirt." Clara bit her tongue. She'd spent an extra hour on that particular stain, scrubbing until her knuckles were raw. "I'll redo it at no extra charge, Mrs. Henderson. See that you do." The woman counted out coins, then deliberately placed them on the porch railing instead of in Clara's outstretched hand, a small gesture of disrespect that wasn't lost on either of them. "You know, Clara, my daughter Penelope is getting married next month to the Patterson boy. His family is giving a dowry of $200 plus 20 acres of good grazing land." Clara's jaw tightened. How wonderful for Penelope. Yes. Well, some families plan ahead. They understand that a woman without means is a burden. Mrs. Henderson's eyes traveled over the shabby cabin. "I do hope you're not getting any ideas about the social at the community hall this Saturday. It's really for eligible young ladies, if you understand my meaning." The words stung, but Clara kept her expression neutral. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Henderson. Your laundry will be ready tomorrow." After the woman left, Lily emerged from inside, her face flushed with anger. "How dare she? You're twice as good as Penelope Henderson, and everyone knows it." "Doesn't matter what I am, Lily. Matters what I have." Clara poured the wash water onto their small vegetable garden, watching it soak into the thirsty earth. "And we don't have anything." But that wasn't entirely true. They had each other, and Clara had her pride, though she was learning that pride didn't pay bills or fill empty stomachs. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores. Clara took in mending from the general store, earning a few cents per garment. She baked bread to sell to the boarding house. She tended their small garden, coaxing life from soil that seemed determined to yield nothing. Every penny was carefully counted, every expenditure weighed against desperate need. As the sun began to set, Clara walked to the town well to fetch water for the evening. The well sat in the center of Meadowbrook's main square, where the general store, the saloon, the church, and the community hall formed the heart of their small settlement. "Well, if it isn't the pauper princess," a voice called out. Clara turned to see Margaret Sullivan and 2 other young women from town, all dressed in their finest afternoon dresses. Margaret's father owned the largest general store in 3 counties. Clara kept walking toward the well, but Margaret stepped into her path. "I heard you thinking about coming to the social on Saturday. That's awfully bold, considering." "Considering what?" Clara met her eyes steadily. "Considering you couldn't afford a dowry if your life depended on it. What man wants a wife who brings nothing but empty pockets and tarnished reputation?" "My reputation is just fine, Margaret. Is it?" Margaret's smile was cruel. Your father died owing money all over town. Your mother ran off when you were children. That's enough." The words came out harder than Clara intended. Touched a nerve, did I? Margaret exchanged glances with her companions. "Face it, Clara, you're damaged. Goods, no dowry, no family worth speaking of, no prospects. You'd do better to find work as a housekeeper somewhere. At least then you'd be useful." The other girls tittered. Clara's hands clenched around her water bucket, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. Getting into an argument with Margaret Sullivan would only make things worse. The Sullivans had influence in Meadowbrook, and Clara couldn't afford more enemies. She filled her bucket in silence and walked away, feeling their eyes on her back and hearing their whispered laughter. The weight of the water seemed lighter than the weight of their scorn. Back at the cabin, Lily had prepared a meager supper of cornbread and thin vegetable soup. They ate in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. "Clara," Lily finally said, "do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere nobody knows us? Every day." Clara stared into her soup. "But we barely have enough to survive here. How would we manage somewhere else? Maybe we could work our way there. Take in laundry in the next town, then the next one, until we're far enough away to start fresh." It was a nice dream, but Clara had learned that dreams had a way of turning into disappointments. "Maybe someday, Lily. For now we make do." That night, Clara lay on her thin mattress staring at the ceiling. The cabin was silent except for Lily's soft breathing and the occasional creak of settling wood. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky, thousands of them, bright and distant and utterly indifferent to the struggles of one poor girl in a frontier town. She thought about Margaret's words, damaged goods, no prospects. Part of her wanted to prove them all wrong, to show up at that social in borrowed finery and hold her head high. But another part, the practical part that had kept them fed and sheltered since their father's death, knew it would be pointless. The men at the social would be looking for wives who brought land, money, or connections. Clara had none of those things. What she did have was determination. And somewhere, buried beneath the exhaustion and humiliation of poverty, a small spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. That the next morning brought a surprise. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. A rider approached the cabin, a man she recognized as Mr. Garrett, who worked as the foreman at the largest ranch in the territory. "Miss Whitmore?" He tipped his hat politely. "I've got a message from Mr. Dalton Ashford. He's looking to hire someone for household work at Ashford Ranch. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. He heard you were a hard worker and wondered if you might be interested." Clara's heart sank even as relief flooded through her. Ashford Ranch. She'd heard of it, everyone had. Dalton Ashford was the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming Territory, maybe in the entire West. His spread covered thousands of acres, and his cattle numbered in the thousands. He was also known for being fair but exacting in his standards. "What's the pay?" she asked, forcing herself to be practical. $30 a month, plus room and board for you and your sister. It's live-in work. $30 a month. It was more money than Clara had seen in the past 6 months combined. It would mean leaving their cabin, but the cabin wasn't much anyway, and she was months behind on the land payment. It would mean admitting that Margaret and Mrs. Henderson and all the others were right. She was only fit for housework, but it would also mean survival, security, a future for Lily. "When does Mr. Ashford need an answer?" "He'd like you to come out to the ranch tomorrow, if you're willing. See the place, meet him, decide if it suits you." Clara nodded slowly. "Tell Mr. Ashford I'll be there." After Mr. Garrett rode away, Lily came outside, her eyes wide. "Clara, what does this mean?" "It means we might have a real chance, Lily. It means we might actually make it through this." That evening, as Clara mended the least worn of her two dresses in preparation for tomorrow's meeting, she felt a strange mix of hope and resignation. She was about to meet the wealthiest man in the territory, not as a potential equal, not as someone worthy of respect, but as a supplicant looking for work. It was a far cry from the life her father had promised when they came west. But it was real, and it was within reach, and sometimes that had to be enough. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow she would meet Dalton Ashford, and nothing in her carefully managed, survival-focused world would ever be the same again. The story of how a girl with no dowry won the heart of the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming territory was about to begin, though Clara Whitmore, exhausted and mending her dress by candlelight, couldn't have imagined how it would unfold. Clara had never seen anything like Ashford Ranch. The journey from Meadowbrook took nearly 2 hours by wagon, and with each passing mile, the landscape transformed from hardscrabble farmland to rolling hills covered in rich grass. Cattle grazed as far as the eye could see, their brands clearly visible even from a distance, the distinctive A of Ashford Ranch. Mr. Garrett had sent a wagon for her at dawn, driven by a weathered cowhand named Pete, who said little but seemed kind enough. As they approached the main compound, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The ranch house was nothing like the modest cabins and simple farmhouses of Meadowbrook. It was a sprawling 2-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide wraparound porch and real glass windows, at least a dozen of them. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys. Nearby stood a massive barn, several outbuildings, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and corrals that seemed to stretch forever. Big place, ain't it? Pete observed, pulling the wagon to a stop near the main house. Mr. Ashford built most of it himself when he first came out here, about 8 years back. Started with nothing but grit and a good head for business. Now look at it. Clara climbed down from the wagon, acutely aware of her patched dress and worn boots. A woman emerged from the house, middle-aged, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression was neutral but assessing. "Miss Whitmore? I'm Ruth Porter, the housekeeper. Mr. Ashford is out checking the south pasture, but he should return shortly. Come inside, I'll show you around while we wait." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room featured a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, comfortable furniture that actually matched, and rugs that looked like they'd come from somewhere exotic. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove that must have cost a fortune to ship out west. Mr. Ashford entertains occasionally business associates, neighboring ranchers, sometimes the territorial governor, Ruth explained as they walked through the rooms. He expects his home to be well-maintained. The work is demanding, but he's fair and pays promptly. Never missed a payday in the 8 years I've been here. Why are you leaving? Clara asked. It seemed odd that someone would give up such a position. Ruth's stern expression softened slightly. My daughter back in Philadelphia just had her 3rd child. Her husband passed last year, and she needs help with the little ones. Mr. Ashford understood when I gave notice. He's a good man, Miss Whitmore. Hard sometimes, but good. They returned to the main room just as the front door opened. Clara turned, and her first glimpse of Dalton Ashford rendered her momentarily speechless. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked alongside his ranch hands rather than merely directing them. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, as if he couldn't be bothered with regular trips to the barber. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with strong features and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue. He couldn't have been more than 32 or 30-3. What struck Clara most, however, wasn't his appearance but his presence. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing and knew exactly what he was worth. Miss Whitmore. His voice was deep, measured. He removed his hat and set it on a hook by the door. Thank you for coming. Out. I'm Dalton Ashford, Mr. Ashford. Clara curtsied slightly, feeling foolish the moment she did it. This was a job interview, not a social call. If he noticed her awkwardness, he didn't show it. "Ruth, would you bring some coffee? We'll talk. In my office." He gestured toward a door off the main room. The office was clearly the working heart of the ranch. A large desk dominated the space, covered with ledgers, maps, and correspondence. Bookshelves lined one wall, actual books, dozens of them. A map of the territory hung on another wall, with pins marking what Clara assumed were Ashford properties and cattle routes. Dalton gestured for her to sit in one of two chairs facing the desk, then took his own seat. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Garrett tells me you're a hard worker, that you've been supporting yourself and your sister since your father passed." "Yes, sir. I take in laundry, do mending, sell bread to the boarding house, whatever needs doing." "Why do you want this position?" The question was direct, almost blunt. Clara appreciated that she was tired of dancing around the truth. "Because $30 a month is more than I can earn in Meadowbrook doing piecework. Because my sister and I need security, and this job offers that. And because I'm good at what I do. Your house will be clean, your meals will be well prepared, and you'll never have cause to complain about my work." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "You're honest. I appreciate that." Ruth arrived with coffee, and Clara noticed it was served in real china cups, not the tin cup she was used to. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with them. "I should be honest with you as well," Dalton continued. "This position isn't easy. I keep irregular hours. Sometimes I'm out overnight checking on cattle or dealing with problems on far sections of the ranch. I expect my home to run smoothly whether I'm here or not. I don't tolerate laziness, excuses, or dishonesty." "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Whitmore, I've built this ranch from nothing. 8 years ago, I arrived in Wyoming with one horse, a bedroll, and enough money for 2 weeks of supplies. Everything you see here exists because I worked harder than everyone else, made better decisions, and never quit when things got difficult. I expect the same dedication from those who work for me." His intensity was almost overwhelming, but Clara met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Ashford, I've kept my sister and myself alive on less than $5 a month. I've made soup from bones other people threw away and mended clothes until there was more patch than original fabric. I know what hard work means, and I know what it takes to survive when everything's against you. If you hire me, you'll get my best effort every single day." "That's not a promise, it's a fact." Silence filled the office. Dalton's expression remained neutral, but Clara could see him reassessing her. She'd spoken more boldly than was probably wise for someone desperate for work, but something about his directness had called forth her own. "Ruth says you have a sister. Lily, is that right?" "Yes, sir. She's 15, a good girl, hardworking like me. She could help with lighter tasks, cleaning, gardening, laundry." "Can she cook?" "She's learning. I've been teaching her." Dalton stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. Clara waited, her heart hammering. She'd been too bold. She'd ruined this chance with her pride and her inability to simply be grateful for the consideration. "When I first came west," he said, still facing the window, "people told me I'd fail. I had no family connections, no inherited land, no capital beyond what I could carry. The banker in Cheyenne laughed when I asked for a loan. The established ranchers treated me like an upstart who didn't know his place." He turned to face her. "I succeeded because I learned to judge people by what they do, not what they have. By their character, not their connections." He paused. "You and your sister can start next week. I'll have Pete bring a wagon to help you move your things. Your monthly wage will be $30, plus room and board for both of you. There's a cottage behind the main house that Ruth uses. It'll be yours. Small, but private and comfortable. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. You won't regret this." "I know I won't. If I thought otherwise, I wouldn't have made the offer." He returned to his desk and pulled out a ledger. "There's one more thing, Miss Whitmore. I understand you're behind on payments for your father's land." Clara's stomach dropped. How did he know that? "Yes, but I'll catch up once I've saved enough from my wages. The land isn't worth much, is it? Too dry for good farming." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "No, sir, it's not worth much. I'll buy it from you. Pay off what's owed and give you an additional $50. That gives you a financial cushion while you settle in here." It was more than generous, it was life-changing. But Clara hesitated. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can, and because it makes practical sense. You'll work better if you're not worried about debt collectors. And truthfully, I've been buying up parcels in that area. Eventually, I plan to run cattle there. Of course, it was business, not charity." That made it easier to accept. "Then yes, Mr. Ashford, thank you." They discussed practical details when she and Lily would arrive, what their duties would entail, the routine of the household. Ruth rejoined them and went over menus, cleaning schedules, and the peculiarities of Mr. Ashford's preferences. He liked his coffee strong, his breakfast early, and his privacy respected. He didn't abide gossiping, waste or disorder. By the time Pete drove Clara back to Meadowbrook, the sun was setting. Her mind spun with everything that had happened. One meeting had transformed her entire future. She and Lily would have security, steady income, a place to live. The crushing weight of poverty would lift as the wagon rolled into town. They passed the community hall where the social would be held tomorrow night. Clara could see women arriving with baskets of food, men setting up tables and lanterns. Margaret Sullivan stood near the entrance in a new dress, laughing with a group of young men. A week ago, the sight would have filled Clara with bitterness and longing. Now she felt nothing but relief. Let them have their social, their dowries, their carefully calculated matches. She had something better, a real chance at building a life on her own terms. When she told Lily the news, her sister actually cried, not from sadness but from overwhelming relief and joy. They stayed up late that night, planning what to bring and what to leave behind, imagining their new life at Ashford Ranch. "Clara," Lily said as they finally prepared for sleep, "do you think Mr. Ashford is married?" "He's my employer, Lily. It doesn't matter if he's married. I was just curious." But Lily's knowing smile suggested she'd seen something in Clara's face when she described the meeting. Dalton Ashford. Clara blew out the candle, refusing to engage. Yes, Dalton Ashford was handsome and impressive and unlike any man she'd ever met. But he was also the wealthiest rancher in the territory, and she was his housekeeper. The gulf between them was unbridgeable, or so she believed. Lying in the darkness of their cabin for one of the last times, unable to know that fate had other plans entirely, the cottage behind the main house was a revelation. 2 small bedrooms, a sitting area with a potbelly stove, and windows with actual curtains. After years in their drafty cabin, it felt like a palace. Lily spent the first hour just opening and closing the cupboards in wonder, marveling at the solid construction and the space they now had. Clara wasted no time settling in. By the end of their first day at Ashford Ranch, she'd already started establishing routines. Ruth stayed for 3 days to train her, and Clara absorbed everything like a sponge, which suppliers Dalton preferred, how he liked his shirts pressed, the corks of the massive kitchen stove where everything was stored. "You're a quick study," Ruth observed on her final morning, watching Clara prepare breakfast. "Most girls would be overwhelmed by all this, but you handle it like you've been doing it for years." "I learn fast when my livelihood depends on it," Clara replied. flipping pancakes with practiced ease. She'd started breakfast at 5. Dalton ate at 6 sharp, before heading out for the day's work. When he entered the dining room precisely at 6, Clara had everything ready: pancakes, bacon, eggs, fresh coffee, and warm biscuits. She'd noticed. Ruth always had biscuits ready apparently. They were his favorite. Dalton paused in the doorway, taking in the perfectly set table. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore." "Good morning, Mr. Ashford. I hope everything's to your liking." He sat and began eating, his expression unchanging. Clara retreated to the kitchen, her stomach in knots. Was it good enough? Too much? Not enough? Ruth had warned her that Dalton rarely gave compliments, but he was quick to point out problems. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when she heard his footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hat already on, ready to leave. The biscuits were excellent, light and flaky. Better than Ruth's, though don't tell her I said so. Clara felt a ridiculous surge of pride. "Thank you, sir. I'll have supper. Ready by 7, unless you need it earlier. 7 is fine. I'll be working the North Range today, so I may be a few minutes late." He paused, then added, "Your sister Lily, she seems to be settling in well. I saw her this morning working in the garden. She's excited to be useful, sir, and grateful for the opportunity." He nodded once and left. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. One successful breakfast down, approximately. 1,000 more to go. The days fell into a rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to start breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning the expansive house. Lily helped with laundry, tended the kitchen garden, and learned to preserve vegetables for winter. Afternoons were for baking, mending, and preparing supper. Evenings were their own precious hours when they could sit in their cottage, read. By lamplight or simply rest, Dalton was a man of few words but consistent habits. He took coffee at 5:30, breakfast at 6, and supper at 7. He spent his evenings in his office, working on ranch ledgers and correspondence. Twice a week, he bathed. Clara would heat water and fill the large copper tub in the bathing room, then discreetly disappear until he was done. Sundays he rode into Meadowbrook for church, though Clara noticed he always sat in the back and left immediately after services. He was demanding but never cruel, exacting but never unreasonable. When Clara accidentally scorched his favorite shirt while pressing it, she confessed immediately, expecting anger. Instead, he merely asked if she could fix it. "I'll try, sir. But the fabric might be too damaged." "Then I'll wear a different shirt." "Mistakes happen, Miss Whitmore. What matters is that you're honest about them." It was a far cry from the treatment she'd received in Meadowbrook, where people assumed the worst of her and blamed her for circumstances beyond her control. 3 weeks into her employment, Clara made her first trip back to Meadowbrook for supplies. Dalton had given her a list and enough money to purchase everything, plus a little extra for herself and Lily. "Take the wagon," he'd said. "Pete will drive you. Get what's on the list, and if you see anything else the house needs, use your judgment." The trust implicit in that statement wasn't lost on Clara. He was letting her make decisions, spending his money based on her assessment. It was responsibility, yes, but also respect. Meadowbrook looked smaller than she remembered. The general store that had once seemed impressive now appeared cramped compared to the spaciousness of Ashford Ranch. Margaret Sullivan was there when Clara entered, examining bolts of fabric with her mother. Their eyes met across the store. Margaret's widened in surprise, then narrowed in calculation. "Clara Whitmore, I heard you were working out at Ashford Ranch now, as a housekeeper." The emphasis on the last word made it sound like an insult. "That's right." Clara handed her list to Mr. Sullivan, Margaret's father, who ran the store. "Mr. Ashford needs these supplies. Playing servant to Dalton Ashford." Margaret's voice dripped with false sympathy. "How the mighty have fallen. Though I suppose you weren't very mighty to begin with." "Margaret," her father warned, but the girl ignored him. "Tell me, Clara, do you serve his meals? Draw his baths? Does he even notice you exist? Or are you just another piece of furniture in that grand house of his? Clara kept her voice level. Mr. Ashford treats me with respect and pays me fairly. For honest work, that's more than most can say. Respect? Margaret laughed. Is that what you call it? Everyone knows why men hire pretty housekeepers. Clara, though I suppose you're desperate enough to accept any kind of attention. That's enough. Mr. Sullivan's face had gone red. Margaret, apologize right now, or leave my store. But Papa, now. Margaret's mouth compressed into a thin line. She gathered her skirts and swept out, her mother following with an apologetic glance at Clara. Mr. Sullivan began gathering the items on Clara's list, his movements brisk with embarrassment. I apologize for my daughter, Miss Whitmore. That was uncalled for. It's all right, Mr. Sullivan. It's not all right. He looked at her directly. I've known Dalton Ashford for 8 years. He's the most honorable man I've ever met. If he hired you, it's because you earned it through your own merit. Don't let jealous gossip make you think otherwise. The unexpected defense brought tears to Clara's eyes. Thank you, sir. He's something, isn't he? Pete had noticed her watching. Best horseman I ever saw. Got a gift for understanding what they're thinking, what they need. Same with people, truth be told. Clara pulled her gaze away, embarrassed to be caught staring. Madame Rousseau was very helpful. She said everything will be ready in 10 days. Good. The boss will be pleased. Pete began unloading their packages. He wants this social to go perfect. Lot of important folks coming, ranchers who could be allies or competitors, politicians who make decisions about land grants and water rights, businessmen from back east looking to invest out here. It matters. That evening, Clara prepared Dalton's favorite meal, roast beef with root vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie. When she served it, he was hunched over papers in the dining room, barely looking up. Smells good, Miss Whitmore. Thank you, sir. I wanted to mention that everything has been arranged with Madame Rousseau. She'll have our clothing ready well before the social. Good. He signed a document, then finally set down his pen and looked at her properly. I appreciate you making the trip to Cheyenne. I know it took most of the day. It was our pleasure, sir. Lily loved seeing the city. Clara hesitated, then forged ahead. Mr. Ashford, may I ask you something? Of course. Why does this social matter so much to you? You don't seem to enjoy these events. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Sit down, Miss Whitmore. Clara blinked in surprise. Sir? Sit. Your supper is getting cold in the kitchen, and I have something to explain. Hesitantly, Clara took the chair across from him. Through the open kitchen door, she could see her own plate waiting, steam still rising from the food. Dalton leaned back in his chair. When I first came to Wyoming, I was 24 years old. I'd left Virginia after my father lost everything, our land, our home, his reputation, bad investments, and worse judgment. I came west to start over, to build something that couldn't be taken away by poor decisions or bad luck. He paused, his gaze distant. The established ranchers treated me like dirt. Some because I had no family name, no connections. Others because I represented what they feared, someone young and hungry who might outwork them, outsmart them, take market share they considered theirs by right. They tried to block my access to water, spread rumors about my cattle being diseased, even attempted to buy up land around my property to hem me in. Clara listened, fascinated. This was more than Dalton had shared about himself in the entire month she'd worked for him. I succeeded anyway, by working harder than them, thinking more strategically, and never letting their disdain stop me. But now, he gestured at the papers on the table. Now I'm negotiating contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm partnering with investors from New York who could bring railroad access to this region. I'm meeting with the territorial governor about water rights legislation that could affect every rancher in Wyoming. And they need to see you as an equal, Clara finished quietly. Not as the upstart they once dismissed. Exactly. His gray-blue eyes met hers. This social isn't about dancing and small talk. It's about demonstrating that Ashford Ranch is established, successful, and permanent. That I belong at the table. Where decisions are made, I understand. And you need your household to reflect that success. Yes, but more than that, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I want you and Lily there because you've earned the right to be. You work hard, you're intelligent, and you handle yourselves with dignity. You belong there as much as anyone else, regardless of what Meadowbrook thinks. The sincerity in his voice made Clara's chest tight. Thank you, Mr. Ashford. That means more than you know. He nodded, then picked up his fork. Now eat your supper before it gets cold. And Clara? The use of her first name caught her off guard. You don't need to be nervous about the social. Just be yourself. That's more than enough. As Clara returned to the kitchen, her mind whirled with new understanding. Dalton Ashford knew what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated. He'd climbed from nothing to become one of the most powerful men in the territory, but he remembered where he'd started. Perhaps that was why he'd hired her, because he recognized something of himself in her struggle to survive and succeed, despite what others thought. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Ruth returned to help, and together with Lily, they cleaned the house until every surface gleamed. Clara planned elaborate menus and tested recipes. They aired out guest bedrooms, polished silver, and washed windows until the glass was invisible. Dalton hired 3 women from Meadowbrook to help serve during the social, and 3 ranch hands to act as valets and manage horses. He brought in a small orchestra from Cheyenne for musicians who would provide dancing music. He even had a temporary dance floor constructed on the wide front lawn, complete with lanterns that would be lit at dusk. 5 days before the social, the dresses arrived from Madame Rousseau. Clara and Lily unpacked them in their cottage, spreading them carefully across the beds. The quality was extraordinary, every seam perfect, every detail carefully executed. Clara lifted the emerald green gown, holding it against herself and looking in the small mirror. For a moment, she saw not a housekeeper, but a woman who could stand in any ballroom without shame. The transformation was almost frightening. You're going to be the most beautiful woman there, Lily said softly. Don't be silly. There will be ranchers' daughters, society women from Cheyenne. I don't care. You'll be the most beautiful. Lily's young face was fierce with loyalty. And Mr. Ashford will see it too. Lily, don't pretend you don't notice how he looks at you sometimes, when he thinks no one's watching. Clara's heart skipped. You're imagining things. Am I? Lily smiled knowingly. He talks to you differently than he talks to anyone else. He trusts you. And when you're in the room, he's aware of exactly where you are. He's my employer. That's all. But that night, lying in bed, Clara allowed herself to wonder. What if Lily was right? What if there was something more in Dalton's gray-blue eyes when he looked at her? What if his kindness wasn't just about respecting a good employee? And more terrifying, what if she wanted there to be something more? She pushed the thought away. She'd spent her whole life being practical, surviving on reality rather than dreams. She couldn't start fantasizing now, not when she finally had stability and security. Dalton Ashford was the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming Territory. She was a housekeeper with no family, no dowry, no prospects beyond her own hard work. Some gulfs were too wide to cross, no matter how fine the dress or how elegant the social. Clara would do well to remember that the day of the social dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather. Clara was up before sunrise, supervising final preparations, even though she'd promised Dalton she would focus on getting ready. Old habits died hard. She couldn't help checking that the tables were properly arranged, the food organized, everything in its place. Miss Clara, please. Ruth shooed her away from the kitchen. I've been doing this for 30 years. Go make yourself beautiful, or Mr. Ashford will have both our heads." Reluctantly, Clara retreated to the cottage where Lily was already awake, practically vibrating with excitement. They had hours before guests would arrive, but neither could stay still. They bathed using water heated on the potbelly stove, then carefully helped each other dress. Clara's emerald gown fit perfectly, cinching at her waist and falling in elegant lines that made her look taller, more graceful. Madame Rousseau had included a simple gold locket on a delicate chain, a gift. Her note had said, "Because every woman needs jewels." Lily styled Clara's hair, pulling it up in a sophisticated twist with a few soft curls framing her face. When Clara looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the tired, work-worn girl in patched dresses. In her place stood a woman who could hold her head high in any company. Lily looked equally transformed in her pink dress, her blonde hair arranged in ringlets, her young face glowing with anticipation. At 15, she was on the cusp of womanhood, and the fine dress seemed to age her forward into that promise. "We look like different people," Lily whispered. "We are different people." Clara squeezed her sister's hand. "We're not the desperate Whitmore girls anymore. We're members of Dalton Ashford's household, and we have every right to be here." They emerged from the cottage to find the ranch transformed. The dance floor gleamed in the afternoon sun, surrounded by tables draped in white linens. Lanterns hung from posts, ready to be lit at dusk. The musicians were setting up their instruments on a small platform. Ranch hands in clean shirts directed arriving wagons to designated areas, and there, supervising everything with his usual quiet competence, stood Dalton Ashford. Clara's breath caught. She'd seen him every day for over a month, but never like this. He wore a black suit that must have been tailored in Cheyenne, or perhaps even Denver. It fit him too perfectly to be off the rack. A crisp white shirt, black string tie, and polished boots completed the ensemble. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and he'd shaved recently, though she could still see the strong line of his jaw. He looked like what he was: a successful, powerful man who'd built an empire through sheer determination. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. His eyes found her across the yard, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. He went completely still, his expression transforming from businesslike assessment to something else entirely, something that made Clara's heart hammer against her ribs. He crossed the distance between them in long strides. "Miss Whitmore, Lily." His voice was slightly rougher than usual. "You both look exceptional." "Thank you, Mr. Ashford." Clara was proud that her voice remained steady. "Everything looks wonderful." "You've outdone yourself." "We've outdone ourselves," he corrected. "This wouldn't be possible without your work." He offered his arm. "Would you allow me to show you around before the guests arrive? There are a few things I'd like your opinion on." Clara placed her hand on his arm, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric. They walked through the transformed space, Dalton pointing out details and asking her thoughts on placement and arrangements. It felt less like an employer consulting an employee and more like a partner seeking a trusted opinion. The first guests began arriving around 4 o'clock. Carriages and wagons rolled in, disgorging men in suits and women in elaborate dresses. Clara recognized some faces from Meadowbrook, but many were strangers, ranchers from distant counties, businessmen from Cheyenne, even a few families who'd traveled from as far as Denver. Dalton stood at the entrance to greet everyone, and to Clara's surprise, he kept her and Lily near him. When he introduced them, it was never as my housekeeper, but simply as Miss Clara Whitmore and her sister Lily, members of my household. The distinction seemed subtle, but Clara understood its significance. He was publicly claiming them as part of his circle, not servants. Margaret Sullivan arrived with her parents, her face freezing when she saw Clara in the emerald gown standing beside Dalton. Her eyes narrowed with calculation and spite. "Why, Clara? she said with false sweetness. Don't you look different? I almost didn't recognize you. Margaret. Dalton's voice held a note of warning. How good of your family to attend. Mr. Sullivan, at least, had the grace to look embarrassed by his daughter's tone. Mr. Ashford, thank you for the invitation. Your ranch is even more impressive than I'd heard. As the Sullivans moved past, Clara felt Dalton's hand briefly touch. The small of her back, a reassuring gesture, there and gone in an instant, but enough to steady her. More guests arrived in a steady stream. Governor Richards and his wife. The Hammond family, who owned the second-largest ranch in the territory. Benjamin Foster, a railroad investor from New York. The Thornton family, successful cattle buyers. Each introduction blurred into the next, until Clara's head spun with names and faces. Through it all, Dalton remained at her side, including her in conversations about cattle prices and railroad expansion, as if her opinion mattered. And strangely, people seemed to accept it. Perhaps because Dalton's confidence made it seem natural, or perhaps because no one dared question Wyoming's most successful rancher. As the sun began to set, ranch hands lit the lanterns, bathing everything in warm golden light. The musicians began to play, and couples moved onto the dance floor. Clara stood at the edge, watching the swirl of color and movement, feeling like an observer in a world that wasn't quite hers. Miss Whitmore. She turned to find Dalton beside her, his hand extended. Would you do me the honor? Clara's mouth went dry. Mr. Ashford, I don't know how to dance properly. Not like this. Then I'll teach you. His gray-blue eyes held hers. Trust me? She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the floor. As the music swelled, he positioned her hands, one on his shoulder, the other held in his, and began to guide her through the steps. At first, Clara was terrified of making a mistake, but Dalton's lead was so confident, so sure, that her body simply followed. Relax, he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. You're doing fine. Around them, Clara was vaguely aware of other couples dancing, of watching eyes, but it all faded into background noise. In this moment, there was only the music, the warmth of Dalton's hand at her waist, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. You surprise me constantly, he said as they moved through a turn. Most people in your situation would be bitter or defeated. But you just keep moving forward. Keep finding ways to not just survive, but excel. I learned from watching you, Clara replied before she could think better of it. You never let anyone's opinion stop you from building what you wanted. Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made her breath catch. Is that how you see me? That's who you are. The music ended too soon. They stood still for a moment, neither quite willing to break apart, until polite applause reminded them they weren't alone. Dalton released her with obvious reluctance. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Ashford. As Clara stepped off the dance floor, she found herself immediately surrounded by several young men requesting dances. She accepted, moving from partner to partner, making polite conversation about cattle and weather and the territorial legislature, but none of it felt real. None of them were Dalton. She caught glimpses of him throughout the evening, always in conversation with important-looking men, always the center of attention. Once she saw him speaking with Governor Richards, their heads bent close in serious discussion. Another time he was laughing with the railroad investor, clearly charming the man with his combination of wit and intelligence. This was Dalton's true element, not the ranch work he did alongside his men, but this world of influence and power and carefully negotiated alliances. And he navigated it masterfully. Quite the evening, isn't it? A woman's voice pulled Clara from her observations. She turned to find Mrs. Hammond, wife of the second wealthiest rancher in the territory, standing beside her. The older woman's shrewd eyes assessed Clara with interest rather than judgment. It's lovely, Clara agreed carefully. Dalton has outdone himself. though I suspect that's partly due to you." At Clara's surprised look, Mrs. Hammond smiled. "My dear, I've known Dalton since he first came to Wyoming. I've watched him build this empire, and I've never seen him as attentive as he is tonight, particularly where you're concerned." Clara's cheeks heated. "I'm just his housekeeper, Mrs. Hammond." "Are you?" The woman's tone was knowing. "My husband started as a ranch hand, you know. No money, no prospects, certainly no family name. I was the daughter of a moderately successful merchant, not wealthy, but respectable enough. Everyone said I was foolish to marry him." She paused, watching the dance floor. "We've been married 32 years. He's now the second most powerful rancher in Wyoming, and I've never regretted my choice for a single moment." "That's a wonderful story. It's a true story. And I'm telling you because I see something similar here." Mrs. Hammond met Clara's eyes. "Dalton Ashford is many things ruthless in business, demanding with his employees, unwilling to suffer. Fools. But he's also a man of deep loyalty and surprising tenderness with those who earn his trust. If he's chosen you, there's a reason. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of whatever he offers." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Hammond moved away, leaving her thoughts in turmoil. Could it be true? Could Dalton's attention mean what Mrs. Hammond implied? As if summoned by her thoughts, Dalton appeared at her side. "I need to speak with you, privately. Would you walk with me?" Clara nodded, her heart racing. They slipped away from the crowd, moving toward the gardens behind the house where lantern light barely reached. The sounds of music and laughter faded to a distant murmur. "The evening is going well," Dalton said, though his tone suggested that wasn't what he wanted to discuss. "Governor Richards is interested in my water rights proposal. Foster wants to discuss bringing a rail spur through Ashford Ranch. The Hammonds mentioned a potential partnership for next year's cattle drive." "That's wonderful, Mr. Ashford. Everything you hoped for." "Yes." He turned to face her, and even in the dim light, she could see the intensity in his expression. "But there's something else. Something I need to say, though I'm likely to make a mess of it." Clara's breath caught. "What is it?" Clara. The use of her first name again, without her title, felt significant. "When I hired you, it was because you were qualified and capable. That hasn't changed. But somewhere in the past month and a half, something else changed. I find myself looking for excuses to talk to you. I notice when you're in a room. I value your opinion on things that have nothing to do with housekeeping." He took a step closer, close enough that Clara could see the rapid pulse in his throat. "I know this is inappropriate. I know I'm your employer, and you may feel obligated to agree with anything I say. But I need you to know." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "You matter to me, Clara, not as an employee, as yourself." Clara's world tilted. Every practical instinct screamed that this was impossible, dangerous, likely to end badly. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart sang with joy. "Mr. Ashford Dalton, I don't know what to say." "Say what you feel, honestly, even if it's not what I hope to hear." "I feel," Clara searched for words adequate to this moment. "I feel like I've been half asleep my whole life, just surviving day to day. And then you hired me, and suddenly, I was awake. Not just because of security or comfort, but because you see me. The real me, not what society says I should be." "Then we're in agreement." His hand reached up, gently touching her cheek. "Because I see you, Clara Whitmore, and what I see is extraordinary." The moment hung between them, full of possibility and promise, neither quite willing to take the final step that would change everything forever. The spell was broken by voices, approaching guests wandering into the garden. Dalton stepped back, his hand falling away from Clara's face, though his eyes never left hers. They returned to the social in silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them, though neither knew quite what to do about it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Clara danced with other partners, made conversation with ranchers' wives, and even endured a barbed comment from Margaret Sullivan about putting on airs. But through it all, she remained hyper-aware of Dalton across the room, catching his gaze multiple times throughout the night. Each look felt charged with unspoken words. As midnight approached, guests began departing. Those staying overnight were shown to their rooms by Ruth and the hired staff. Clara helped coordinate the cleanup, slipping back into her natural role of managing the household, though now she wore an emerald gown instead of an apron. Finally, the last guest retired for the night. The musicians packed their instruments, the hired help departed, and silence settled over Ashford Ranch. Clara stood on the porch, looking out at the remnants of the social lanterns burning low, tables still scattered with dishes, the dance floor empty under starlight. "Leave it," Dalton's voice came from behind her. "Ruth and the others will handle it tomorrow. You've done more than enough." Clara turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his jacket removed and his tie loosened. He looked tired but satisfied, and somehow more approachable in his slight dishevelment. "It was a successful evening," she said. Everyone seemed impressed. They were. Governor Richards pulled me aside to say this was the finest event he'd attended outside of Denver. Foster is drafting a proposal for the railroad spur. Even Hammond admitted I've done well for myself. Dalton smiled slightly at that last bit. "Everything I hoped to accomplish happened." "Then why do you look troubled?" He pushed off from the doorframe and moved closer. "Because now I'm wondering if I've complicated everything by telling you how I feel. If I've made you uncomfortable, put you in an impossible position. You work for me, Clara. The power dynamic is—" "Dalton," she interrupted him gently. "Do you want to know what I was thinking about during that last dance with Benjamin Foster?" "What?" "I was thinking about how different my life could have been. If I'd been born to a wealthy family with a proper dowry and social connections, I might have been courted by men like Foster. Respectable men with money and prospects." She took a breath. "And I was thinking how grateful I am that I wasn't. Because none of those men would have seen me the way you do. They would have seen the dowry, the connections, the social advantage. You see me." Dalton closed the remaining distance between them. "I see a woman who's stronger than anyone I've ever met, who faces hardship with dignity and work with dedication, who makes me laugh when I'm too serious and challenges me when I'm being stubborn. I see someone I want to talk to at the end of every day and wake up thinking about every morning. That's a lot more than I expected when I came here to interview for a housekeeping position," Clara said, her voice catching slightly. "I know, and I know we have obstacles. People will talk. They'll say I've taken advantage of you, or you're trying to trap a wealthy husband. They'll mock your lack of dowry and question your motives." His jaw tightened. "I've spent my entire adult life not caring what people think, but I need to know you can handle that scrutiny. I won't let you be hurt by association with me." Clara thought of Margaret Sullivan's sneering comments, Mrs. Henderson's dismissive attitude, all the small cruelty she'd endured in Meadowbrook. Then she thought of Mrs. Hammond's story of building a life despite others' opinions. "Let them talk," she said firmly. "I've been mocked for having nothing. I can handle being mocked for having everything." Dalton's expression transformed relief and joy and something fiercer. "Then I'm going to do this properly, even if it's backward." He took her hand formally. "Miss Clara Whitmore, I would be honored if you would allow me to court you. With the ultimate intention of asking you to be my wife, if you'll have me." Clara's heart soared, but her practical nature reasserted itself. "People will expect you to marry someone with land or money or connections. Someone who brings something to the partnership beyond yourself," Dalton interrupted. "Clara, I don't need land. I have thousands of acres. I don't need money. I have more than I can spend. I don't need connections. I've built those through my own efforts. What I need is someone who understands what it took to build all this. Someone who knows the value of hard work because they've done it themselves. Someone who won't love me for my wealth because they loved me before they even knew they did. I never said I loved you, Clara protested weakly, even as her eyes filled with tears. Didn't you? His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Then let me say it first. I love you, Clara. Your strength, your wit, your refusal to be defeated by circumstances that would have broken most people. I love the way you sing when you think no one's listening, and how you make sure Lily eats before you do. I love your honesty and your pride and your stubborn insistence on earning everything yourself. Dalton, Clara's voice broke. I'm terrified. What if this doesn't work? What if you realize I'm not enough? He cupped her face in both hands, making her look at him. You are more than enough. Your heart is enough. It's everything. Clara felt something inside her break open, all the fear and doubt she'd carried for years. The belief that she was somehow less than others because of circumstances beyond her control. In Dalton's eyes, she saw herself reflected as worthy, valuable enough. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that first day, when you bought my father's land and told me mistakes were acceptable, as long as I was honest about them. When you treated me with more respect in 5 minutes than Meadowbrook had shown me in 3 years. Then we're agreed. Dalton smiled, and Clara realized it was the first time she'd seen him truly completely happy. Though I should warn you, the next few months will be difficult. News of our courtship will spread, and people will have opinions. Let them. Clara felt a surge of defiance. I've survived worse than gossip. I know you have. That's why I'm not worried. He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. There's one complication. If we're courting, you can't continue as my housekeeper. The appearances would be inappropriate, Clara finished. I understand. But Dalton, I can't just stop working. I need to earn my place. What if you ran the household as mistress of Ashford Ranch? He spoke quickly, as if he'd been thinking about this. Not as an employee, but as my partner in managing the property. He'd oversee the house, the staff, the accounts. Make decisions about supplies and improvements. Ruth is leaving anyway, and I was going to need to hire someone. Why not you, in a different capacity? Clara considered this. It was different from being a housekeeper, more authority, more responsibility, and a role that wealthy ranch wives often filled. What about Lily? Lily is welcome to stay as long as she likes. She's family. He said it so simply, as if it were obvious. Once we're married, she'd be my sister too. And if she wants more education, we can arrange for her to attend school. In Cheyenne or even further east. Everything was happening so fast, but Clara found she didn't want to slow down. For the first time in years, she was running towards something instead of away from survival. Over the next 3 months, Dalton Ashford courted Clara Whitmore with the same determination he'd shown in building his empire. He took her riding across his vast property, showing her the land he loved. They had long dinners where they talked about everything from cattle breeding to their favorite books. He brought her small gifts, not jewelry or expensive items, but things that showed he paid attention. A book of poetry because she'd mentioned liking Wordsworth, a new set of gardening tools after he saw her working with broken implements, a music box that played a waltz they'd danced to at the social dot. The gossip, as predicted, was fierce. Meadowbrook buzzed with speculation and scandal. Margaret Sullivan announced to anyone who would listen that Clara had trapped Dalton through manipulation. Mrs. Henderson proclaimed it improper for a man of Dalton's stature to marry so far beneath himself. Even some of the neighboring ranchers expressed doubts, not to Dalton's face, of course, but in whispers that inevitably reached Clara's ears. But there were supporters too. Mrs. Hammond made a point of calling on Clara and publicly embracing her as a friend. Mr. Sullivan from the general store offered his congratulations with genuine warmth. Several ranch hands who'd watched Clara work tirelessly made their approval clear. And Governor Richards, when he heard the news, sent a note saying that Dalton had excellent judgment in all matters, including matters of the heart. Through it all, Dalton remained unwavering. When someone made a disparaging comment in his presence, his response was simple and devastating. Clara is the finest woman I've ever known. If you can't see her worth, that reflects poorly on you, not her. One evening, about 4 months after the social, Dalton asked Clara to meet him at the spot where he'd first confessed his feelings. The garden was beautiful in early winter, with the first light snow dusting the ground and stars brilliant overhead. "I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring not ostentatious but beautiful in its simplicity. A single diamond set in gold, with smaller stones on either side. "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mistress of Ashford Ranch, and the keeper of my heart?" Clara looked at the ring, then at Dalton's face, seeing in it everything she'd never dared to hope for: love, respect, partnership, and a future built on mutual regard rather than social convention. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time, gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious he'd waited his whole life to find. They were married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the church in Meadowbrook. Lily stood as Clara's bridesmaid, and Mr. Hammond served as Dalton's best man. The church was packed with a mixture of ranch hands, business associates, neighboring families, and even some of Clara's former critics who decided that being connected to Dalton Ashford was more important than their previous disdain. Margaret Sullivan attended, her face tight with barely concealed envy. Mrs. Henderson was there too, suddenly eager to claim acquaintance with dear Clara. Clara greeted them both with gracious civility, secure enough in her new position to afford kindness to those who'd shown her none. As Dalton slipped the wedding band onto her finger beside the engagement ring, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate poverty to this moment, standing beside the most powerful man in Wyoming territory, not because of a dowry or family connections, but because he'd looked past all of that and seen her worth. The reception was held at Ashford Ranch, of course. As they took their first dance as husband and wife, Dalton pulled her close and whispered, "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Twice at breakfast and once before the ceremony," Clara replied, smiling. "But I'll never tire of hearing it. Good, because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives." Looking around the room, Clara saw Lily laughing with some of the younger ranch hands, Mrs. Hammond beaming approval, and even Governor Richards raising his glass in toast. She saw the home she'd helped create, the life she'd built through determination and hard work, now transformed into something she'd never imagined possible. She'd been mocked for having no dowry. Society had declared her worthless without family wealth or connections. But Dalton Ashford had looked at her and said something revolutionary: "Your heart is enough." And he'd been right. Her heart, her courage, her determination, her refusal to be defined by what she lacked, had been more than enough. It had been everything. Years later, when people asked Clara about her improbable rise from penniless housekeeper to wife of Wyoming's most successful rancher, she would smile and tell them the truth. "I didn't need a dowry to build a life. I just needed someone who could see past society's measurements of worth to what actually mattered." And Dalton taught me the most important lesson, that the only dowry that truly matters is the one you carry in your heart. Together, they built more than a successful ranch. They built a partnership based on mutual respect, a family filled with love, and a legacy that proved worth had nothing to do with what you were born with and everything to do with who you chose to become. And Clara Whitmore Ashford, once mocked for having nothing, discovered she had everything all along. She just needed someone brave enough to see it and to help her see it in herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss